let's now talk about Azure DevOps. We've seen how we can automate the deployment of configuration, how we can do the monitoring, but how do you actually maintain that in a real life situation? Like, how is your enterprise or your client supposed to manage that configuration? And try to see if there's a way to automate that entire pipeline. So the continuous integration and the continuous delivery pipelines. So what we're going to be talking about here is how you can actually have your configuration, what I call my source of truth, stored inside of Azure DevOps as source control management, and detect the moment there's a change to the configuration, compile the configuration to validate that the configuration is actually valid, and then deploy that to a remote tenant. So really what we're trying to do here is we want to make sure that your entire code or your entire tenant configuration is managed inside of Azure DevOps. So the challenge really is to go and convince the IT pros to do it. In some of the demos I'm going to be showing now, we're going to be using Visual Studio Code. That normally doesn't resonate well with IT pros, right? When you have to tell them that you need to install Visual Studio Code, but it is a change in mindset. You need to go and start adopting some of those tools, right? You're going to be writing configuration as code inside Visual Studio Code so that you can interact with Azure DevOps. So the idea is, right, you need to change the traditional approach that we have had in the past. I used to be an Office 365 admin, and if somebody from the dev team would come to me and say, Nick, we're actually working on a new SharePoint framework component, and for it to work, we require you to go in the search administration in SharePoint Online and create a new managed property called feedback, for example. Can you do that? Sure. If I only have one tenant, chances are I'm going to go in the admin portal and create that property. Or I'll just use like a new -SPO search managed property type of switch. I'm not even sure if that commandlet, sorry, I'm not even sure if that's the real name of the commandlet, but use something like a one-liner to create it, right? Now we need to change that. We need to change the approach from what I just described to an approach where when a developer comes to you and asks you to change something, you go to that source of truth, so your master script, and you actually write a definition for that new search managed property that they're asking for. Right? So the idea is, all right, you want to make a change to the config, you open the master config, you make your changes, so you add a new one, you modify or you remove something, you commit your changes back to Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps detects that there's a change, and it will go and it will push it to an environment. Now in this case here, what I'm describing is if you have multi-tier environments. So for example, I still have clients that have a dev, a QA, and a prod tenant, right? So it's an approach that's valid. I wouldn't recommend that, but it's something that some users have. So right now what's happened is that Azure DevOps compiled my configuration, it was valid, it's sending it over to my dev environment. The moment it makes it to the dev environment, it sends an email to the dev team saying, your new managed search property has been created. Can you please validate that it's working? The dev team approves it. Automatically, Azure DevOps pushes it to the QA environment, and the QA team gets a notification. So that's the process of a continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline. All of it is starting from Visual Studio Code when you make your modification, and then everything gets automatically pushed over to your Office 365 tenant. Now, how do you do the continuous monitoring of your environment? Because the reality is, everything I've showed you so far was running directly from this laptop here, so from my Surface Book. So every 15 minutes, it's going to do a consistency check. What happens when I close the lid for the laptop? Consistency check is no longer happening, right? Because that machine now is my agent. Of course, you can spin up a VM in Azure and have the configuration run from this, but you're paying for VM to act as a middleman, really. What we're recommending you do is you actually leverage Azure DevOps pipelines to do that. You can do what we call a schedule build pipeline, or sorry, schedule release pipeline. So you can say, all right, I want that pipeline to run, let's say, twice a day at 6 a.m. and at 6 p.m. And what that resource or what the pipeline is going to do is it's going to do basically test DSC configuration remotely against all your tenants. It's going to go, all right, is the dev tenant still in the desired state? Yes, it is. Is the QA tenant in the desired state? No, it's not. And then grab information about what the configuration drift is and send an email. So you're being proactive. You're doing continuous monitoring through an agent-less process to a certain degree, where it's using pipelines instead of an actual machine or a virtual machine that you need to pay for or keep up all the time. And yeah, so it's the same process. We're just moving that need for an agent into Azure Devops pipelines. So let's do a demo. So what I have here is I have a repository. Let's just have a look at the files. That repo contains 3 config. Right? So I decided in my case to break down my entire tenant's configuration into 3 smaller sources of truth. One for Exchange, one for SPO, and one for Teams. That repo has been synchronized locally. So if I take a look at my files, so my Exchange config 1 defines the organization config, SPO 2 site collections, and my Teams config defines 1 Teams calling policy. So let's say I want to add a new Teams calling policy. I want to add a second one that's going to be preventing private calling, let's say. I'm just going to go and copy this block here. I'm going to call it Nick Demo. This one here is going to be called Nick Demo, and I always like to use the current time. So it's currently 3:53 p.m. for me, just to show that, again, there's no smoke and mirrors. I'm going to go and set that to false, and I save that. Now, I'm going to go to my Git. I'm going to commit that. So basically send the changes up to my Azure DevOps. I'm going to say demo. I'm going to commit that. And I'm just going to push the changes. Now, if I go back to my Azure repo, you can see here that I have 3 pipelines. 1 for each. So those are build pipelines. 1 for each of my workloads. If I refresh this here, it automatically detected that the Teams config has changed. So therefore, it needs to rebuild and revalidate the Teams configuration. That will take a few seconds, but essentially what it's doing right now is it's compiling the file as a MUF file. And if there are any errors in compiling it, that means the configuration is not valid, and it's going to send me an email saying the compilation failed, and here's why. So it'll take a few seconds. Then what's going to happen is that the moment this build is successful, it's going to trigger a release pipeline for Teams, a pipeline called Teams Deploy. And what this pipeline is going to do is push my configuration to my tenant. Now, in the slides, I showed you a different type of approach where you actually have multi-stages environment. So that would be the same thing here. So you can see my SPO pipeline here is being deployed to the dev environment. Then once it's approved, I get an email, I approve this, it goes to the QA and up to the prod. Right? In my case, I just wanted to keep it fairly simple. So I just have the Teams deployed go straight to my production tenant. Now, if we take a look at our pipelines, should be done any second now. Let's just drill down. So it's currently compiling the configuration. Should take a few seconds. And the moment, so basically I have the triggers set for continuous integration and continuous deployment. So the trigger for continuous integration means every time there's a change to the file, compile it, validate that it's valid. And then the continuous deployment trigger says every time there's a successful build, push it to my tenant. So the pipeline should be done now. There we go. So if I go back to the pipelines, refresh this here, I should see that the Teams one was successful. Perfect. It automatically should have triggered a new release under the Teams. So you can see it's right here. It's being queued right now, but it actually created that new release. It's waiting for an agent to be ready, but the moment, in a few seconds, you're going to see it being triggered, and it's pushing my changes to my prod tenant. Then automatically what I'm going to see is if I go here and go to my calling policies, I will see my new NIC 353 policy appear. So you can see I already had that DevOps policy, so that was the first one, the DevOps calling policy, that was already part of my source of truth. And then this one here will, the second one will appear here once the pipeline is done. And by the way, I just received a notification on my watch that my build was successful. So I know that my changes have been compiled successfully, and that it's also telling me that right now they're being pushed to my production tenant. So if I go back here, you can see that it is currently being deployed. And so it's running as we speak. We're going to give it a few more seconds, and then we should be able to just go back here, refresh the page, and get the content. I'm going to get just a quick sip of water because I'm losing my voice right now. But that's the idea in a nutshell, right? If you're serious about doing DevOps, you need to start adopting proper application lifecycle management processes. And that's one of them. Keep your source of truth. If you're using configuration as code, you need to make sure that all the changes are done in that configuration. Don't have like multiple processes where one admin will go in the portal, make changes, the other one will grab a piece of code from the web and just run a new team, or that would have been new CS Teams calling policy, and other people are using DSC. No, everybody needs to use that one source of truth if you want to be successful in managing your Office 365 environment using DSC. We're just going to give it a few more seconds. We can see that the configuration is happening as we speak. So it is doing the DevOps calling policy. So it's just validating that one already exists. It's going to come back saying, yes, it's already there because we've seen it. And then it's going to come back with the creation of the other one. So let's just give it a few more seconds to complete. And the pipeline finished. So everything got deployed properly. If I go back to this here and refresh now, hopefully, I should see my new policy. There we go, Nick Demo 353.